History. So for those that are new to the forum, welcome. This event is organised by the Avazad Fusion Duo, a contemporary fusion ensemble led by Atafa El-Nali and myself. Our ensemble specialises in the combination of Persian and Western musical practices, taking inspiration from folk traditions around the world and making them relevant in our current times. The Composers Forum is a scheme we run to build a community around our work as a duo, to immerse ourselves in the music scene of our contemporaries and invite people to engage with us on a more collaborative level. This event is open to all and is scheduled to continue at this time on the first Sunday of every month. We will be keeping you up to date about future events and opportunities to get involved via our monthly newsletter. If you'd like to unsubscribe, do let us know. As last time, we'll be recording this session and posting on YouTube for the benefit of those that could not make it. If you do not wish to appear in the recording, please switch your camera off or let us know. So the programme for this evening will feature a composition of my own called the Origami Crane. So I'm going to first of all talk a bit about myself as a composer and about the initiative of this piece, how I came to write it. And then afterwards, we'll open up the forum to questions. So we encourage you to make use of the chat function or raise the hand button in the bottom toolbar to make this experience as interactive as possible. And please don't, there's no pressure to talk if you don't want to, but it's always nice to see in the comments if you have anything to say, so please feel free. So also one last thing, please ensure you have your mic turned off during the performance of the composition. We're just going to play like a recording, but sometimes there's a bit of disturbance when the microphone's on. So I'm going to first of all share my score. So can you all see it? Just give me a thumbs up. That's it? Good, great, thank you. So this is the score for the Origami Crane, and it has quite a crazy story behind it actually. It was in the middle of lockdown, and I was like, I'd reached a creative low point, like one of the lowest points in my whole time, and I was like feeling really bad because everyone was creating things and I just couldn't. I couldn't think of anything at the time. And then I saw this application for the London Sinfonietta to send in postcard pieces, which are like compositions that you fit onto the back of a postcard and you send it to the London Sinfonietta. And they had like, I think 4 different musicians, and they would play the composition live, whoever was selected. And I always wanted to do it, but I never managed to think of anything on time. So I never managed to submit anything, but I was really, really inspired by the pieces. Like Josh Brown, I think, sent one in, which was absolutely phenomenal. And I was like so inspired by it that I decided to do something like that of my own. And so as I was walking and just reflecting on how this could happen, I was like trying to visualize or imagine something that could express how I felt. And I just couldn't think of anything that would accurately depict that. And so after a while, I was like about to give up hope. And then I realized for the first time that actually sometimes you don't need to start out with a concept for music. You can start out with just anything really. And sometimes the process of creating itself, the process of sitting down and like just doing what feels right, and that doesn't have to be the end product, but that process can be the initiative towards the concept. That was the idea that like sprung to mind, that kind of led to the conception of this piece, and also changed the way I actually compose from then on. So what I basically did is I decided, okay, screw it. I have no idea what I have no idea what I want to say. That's fine. I'm just gonna get a piece of paper and some pencil, and I literally just went like that. I didn't have any vision of what it was going to be. I just did a series of lines, and then I tried to like make something pleasing out of it. And then I discovered that it looked a bit like a crane. So I was like, okay, so it's a crane. But even then, like I think I came up with the name for this piece like right at the end. So I didn't have any idea of what it was. I was really just following in a more kind of abstract way, just following the kind of the curves, and I can actually I'll show you. Isn't there yeah, there's a spotlight. Like for instance here I was just following this, like the way it goes down, and like following, just really just trying to follow the movement of the lines themselves, and seeing and using that as an inspiration, because I feel like there is some kind of really subliminal subconscious connection between what pleases us visually and what pleases us in a like auditory way, like the music itself. I'm not sure what it is. Maybe it's like the energy, the flow of the energy, or like the motion. There's something for me. Music has always been an expression of motion and energy control. And just by looking at this artwork, I see things moving around. Like I see this moving and that moving there, and like there's a lot of interaction between things. So I basically kind of try to just develop the notes based on what looked good, which is crazy, I know. But I did then change it. So I had some idea of like the basic contours and the basic types of motions and gestures and expressive things I wanted to achieve based on like how I was stimulated by this image. And then I went to the keyboard and I worked on it, and I just like created stuff on the spot. And I think I might have even had a selection of notes that I wanted. I just small selection of notes that I decided to use, and then just shaped the music around that, just to give it some kind of scaffold, to keep it contained and to make it all kind of relevant within itself, because I didn't want it to feel like any part was drifting out of the image. I wanted it to feel like every bit was related, because they're all kind of interconnected. So when I wrote this piece for a really incredible pianist called Maria Palapanidou, and she's also a composer. And when I wrote this, I sent it to her as a postcard, and she, all the way to Greece, crazy, right? And she played me a few different versions, and I liked all of them so much. I only put one up on SoundCloud, but I liked all of them. So I thought we could play all of them, because they're all quite small. They're all like 3 minutes long. And I didn't tell her any, I gave her no instructions whatsoever, which I realized was a mistake. I should have, the recording was perfect, so it didn't need it, but like I realized that as a composer, I probably should have given them some sort of instructions. I just forgot about it, because to me it seemed kind of obvious that you just kind of you just move instinctively between each thing, and you kind of work it out for yourself how you get from one fragment to another. But I guess not everyone like would necessarily interpret it that way. But that was the idea I had in mind. I like the idea of this empty space that initiates the performer to try and work out how they can connect things together. So I didn't want it to be specifically this and then this and then, because it doesn't make any sense anyway. But I wanted the performer to think, okay, how am I going to get from here to here? Okay, I'm going to do this or that. And it kind of stimulates them to get involved in a more creative way as well. So to be part of the creative process. And yeah, that's a summary of the whole thing. Do we have any questions before we move on to playing the music?
Simon said something in the chat.
Oh, sorry, I can't see the chat. Where is it?
No, it's fine. Get to that at the end. This is fine for now.
Okay, sure. Okay, so I'll start playing them then, shall I? Okay, great. I don't think it is possible to see both and listen, is it?
Yeah, there is an option you can share audio and desktop together.
Really? Where's that?
You did in our sound check.
Separately though. I went on basic and then advanced.
Yeah, I think the audio then has to come from the same screen as what you're showing. And as this is a picture, I think it cannot do that.
Oh, that's a shame. Okay. So I guess okay. Then I guess we'll just have to.
So how did you do in the sound check? Because in sound check I could hear and I could see the.
Well, I guess it probably didn't. It probably didn't share both. It probably just shared the screen. It's okay. We could just. I think the quality is good enough. So I'm gonna start playing the first miniature.
Eliora, we can't hear you. You muted yourself. Sorry, this is the second rendition, I just realized.
Oh wait, no. Sorry. That was playing again. Hang on. Yeah, so that was the first one. And now I'm gonna play the second. It just for some reason it just started again on its own. It's very similar to the first, but it changes a bit. Oh, that's that one starting again. And then we've got one more. Yeah, so that's it. If you have any questions, feel free. Hey, Simon?
I have so many questions. This may not be surprising because you know where my compositional interests lie. So this is very much in my wheelhouse. So, gonna start with the tricky one. You said, perhaps controversially, that you thought it was, and you probably maybe didn't necessarily think this fully through, but you said that it was maybe a mistake to have not sent an instruction and you just didn't think of it. Why was it a mistake?
Well, I think if I wanted, I think I should make an intention clear about whether I want them to play something specific or to have the freedom, because having the freedom is kind of an essential point of the music. So just to clarify that intention, I think it's important. Even if I weren't to say exactly this is what I want you to do, but just to make a statement that you're free to follow the line wherever, I think that was the missing detail.
Does the score not make that statement itself?
Because I don't know.
Doesn't it? Doesn't it? Because, you know, as much as obviously the shape can kind of bear a lot of implications, but Maria always started on all three of those at the top right. I'm guessing she hasn't joined this chat today. I'm not seeing her anyway. But because I'd love to ask her about this, because you know, whether she made that choice because of a thought about the material itself, because it was quite a strong and recognizable bit of material with that kind of clear kind of, obviously you've got the trill, but then you've got the quite clear kind of theme. And whether that was a decision that was made because it was the top right, and a musician trained in Western notation would kind of default to there. And I was wondering.
Well, you go to the left actually if you're reading from left to right.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, it is left. She started at the top left. Okay. And I'm just getting my left and my right mixed up because I've had a cold for the last 3 days and I've just been at work for a large number of hours. So that's on me. So that kind of brings me to my other question, which kind of leads on from that, which is kind of, did you intentionally, so you've got this quite strong material at the top left, was that intentional? Did you, to what extent did you kind of try to structure the music across this page? Did you kind of try to have certain strong themes in places where I might automatically be drawn to? Did you kind of try to spread out bits of similar material across it, or was it kind of, how much of that was thought about?
Well, not much really, to be honest. It was really quite instinctive. I kind of I used like a selection of notes, I guess. And then I just thought, okay, this is high up. It looks like it's soaring up into the sky. So I'll put it high up in the range, and that looks like it's going down. So I made the notes go down.
Okay, so it's actually broadly based around the shape. That's cool. That's interesting.
Mostly. And the whole concept of the piece actually was to use the shape as like a scaffold, like a musical scaffold, and to imagine that you're just climbing your way, you're exploring it, physically exploring the space that created by the lines and within the lines and stuff like that.
Yeah, excellent. And then, sorry, I'm going to do one more before I cede to somebody else, and then maybe get back to that original point. Did you sketch some of these musical ideas on separate paper first, or did you just kind of straight up commit them to this? Because I often, like, if I've got lots of segments going on, I will like carefully measure them out onto manuscript paper and write, so that I can edit them before so that I know what's going to be on the page before they go on. But that's me.
I think I wrote them out first. So I think I had some. Yeah, I think I wrote out some short motifs on manuscript paper, and then, but I based all of those motifs on the space themselves. So I thought, okay, so I'm looking at this. I'm going to write something that fits into that space. Wrote it down on a manuscript paper because it was easiest, and then just because it was actually not. Yeah, no, I think so. I think that's how I did it, and then I put it into the score. And I kind of, when I wrote it down, as I was writing it down, like they started out as really kind of simple motifs that I played on the piano, and then when I wrote it into the score, they developed a bit more expression. So I spaced them out according to what the shape was, or like here, for instance, the way it's like slowly getting apart, that was partly because of the shape. So it did change, like as I put it into the music, it was still kind of like, yeah, I had like a basic idea already, like what notes I wanted to use and what textures, and I wrote those out on manuscript, but then when I put it onto the
score.
Exactly, yeah, to make it like
cool. Excellent, cool. I think there's a follow-up question in chat, so yeah.
Sure. Is anyone? Oh, sorry, I'm missing a few things.
Do you want me to? I could read the question.
Yeah, that would be great.
It's from Govert. I'm sorry, I don't know. You can correct my pronunciation if you like.
Yeah,
or you can ask yourself. You're here.
Yeah, sure. So basically, you also observed already that the performer apparently starts in the top left corner. So that is a kind of structure that emerges there, maybe unwantedly so. But then Eliora answered that the manuscript is supposed to work as a scaffolding upon which things emerge and happen. But then the question is maybe the converse. So not what is the scaffolding meant to structure, but what kind of role do you want arbitrariness and coincidence and stochastics to play, right? If you don't determine everything, then it will be arbitrary in a way. But I think we never want full arbitrariness, right? Because then it becomes mess and noise. So what do you want this arbitrariness to do for you?
That's a really, really good question. So that's also linked to the concept of the piece, which is to use material that binds everything together. So it's saying this is part of the organism, basically. They're all cells that belong to the same organism. And that's why I used a very small selection of notes to make sure that anything that is played somehow is familiar and connected. But at the same time, I really wanted the performer to look at those notes and think, okay, I don't know how I'm going to get, like, there's no logical way really of getting from one place to the next. Well, there is a bit, but like, there is always a bit of a gap, like a gap between from here to here, for instance. There's always a bit of a gap, and there's always a bit of, so that ambiguity is where I want the performer to find. It's more the ambiguity between things that is what I want the performer to play. It's not the notes. It's not really the stuff that I've written down themselves. I obviously want like some freedom, expressive freedom, but the bits that interest me the most, really, from my point of view, are how they get between each of these bits. Like, what do they do with this, for instance, and what do they do with this? And like, it's really, I have always been fascinated by the idea of creating different links. I feel like creativity, the whole source of creativity, is linking things that don't necessarily match together and finding your own creative link for that. And I think that's where I wanted the performer to express themselves. So yeah, I guess that's that was the concept behind it. I don't know, sure. Does that answer your question? I'm not really sure.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it is your answer, so it's the right answer. But I think in general, you always need some structure, right? And you also always need some freedom. So in that sense, there is nothing radically new in this. I mean, if I play Bach, there's also a lot of freedom that I put into performing Bach. So in that sense, it is not radically new to leave something to the performer, but you strike the balance quite differently. And I think that's interesting to reflect upon. Yeah, indeed. So where the balance between determination and free choice, and whether free choice is the same thing as arbitrariness, I think it is not. And by constraining the choices one can make, you make it more into free choice rather than arbitrariness, but that is a conceptual thing you do, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'm not telling the performer what to do, but I'm telling them, please use what I've given you and try and make sense out of it. And I think telling someone to make sense out of something is already a structure. You're already creating.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Framework. Yeah. Sorry, Simon.
Good. Thanks.
Yeah, I just wanted to dig slightly further into that to kind of whether there are ways to play this. So we've clarified that there's no one way to play this right. Yeah. Is there a way to play this piece wrong?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think if you move away from if you move too far away from the material and you don't really follow the flow of what's going on. So I think if I were to play this, for instance, as a performer, I would familiarize myself with all the material first. And in order to make it sound effective, to sound like it's actually the image, like it's actually the organism that I've presented, I would try and find ways to move between them that are fluid and that really express the character of the artwork.
So to play it wrong would be to not engage with it, but if you have engaged with it and the material, then you are by definition playing it right.
And I think
so if I was to say play this kind of top left hand corner and then go down that line from the forte and then play that kind of segment that you then lead to backwards.
Oh no, that would be great.
Okay.
Because I think that's a brilliant idea. And I love that kind of engagement and I think also Maria did a good job of it because she kind of kept that character And I think when you play things backwards, you still maintain the character. The order of the notes is totally irrelevant in most cases in this music. It's really just about the gestures and about the movement of the eye and the energy. So whatever order you play it in is irrelevant as far as I'm concerned.
And what if I were to play it on an instrument other than piano?
I really want to try that actually.
Okay.
I'm going to have it performed at the Coma Festival. Coma.
Yeah, that should be a good opportunity for pushing
Yeah,
boundaries.
I'd really
I don't-
like to feel how it works out.
Coma groups can vary a bit on that front in terms of how they'll engage with that, but if I were to present this to the Glasgow branch, which who I play with a bit, I can assure you that every single like person there would have a different way of interpreting it.
That sounds really cool.
Which is cool.
But I think maybe I think with the Coma people, I'm going to give some kind of instructions. And I think with the piano, there's less of a need for that because it's already it's kind of clearer for a pianist, I imagine, than for like, I don't know, for some other instrument, just because of the way, like you have these chords and like the glissandi type things. And
Is it explicitly for a solo instrument?
it was, yeah, it was actually for Maria, so I imagined her playing it when I wrote it, but I can totally imagine it being played like even as an orchestra piece. I think like I can really imagine it.
We should
But
talk
I think
about this at some point in future.
sure.
Because we in the Glasgow Coma group we do a thing called Open Score Club where we kind of get together twice. As you have done one this morning, it's kind of twice a month, first Sunday and then third Tuesday, I think. Where it's kind of like it's an hour and a quarter and we just sit down with a piece of music and play around with it and try and find our own way around it or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it would be quite fun to give this a try.
It would really
So we'll talk.
It is going to be for the Glasgow Coma, Eliora, because Ruth has said to you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Good.
Yeah,
I
so
will be
I
involved
must-
in that then.
yeah, that was. I want to just make sure that you know,
Yeah.
Eliora. It's a Glasgow one.
We would definitely make a very solid group performance of this. In my view.
Yeah. I'd be really interested to hear that
so
as well.
we'll, yeah,
Really cool.
I look forward to being involved in discussions of that further down the line. Then,
Yeah.
in that case, cool. I think beyond delving further and further into kind of the initial question around sort of instruction versus non-instruction and all of that, the sort of philosophy behind that was a weird pronunciation of philosophy, but the philosophy behind the piece, which could drag on forever. I think I'm going to finish up all of my questions because I feel like I've dominated everything so far. So
Great.
if anybody
Thank
else
you.
wants to chip in, then feel free.
Thank you, Eliora, for sharing this piece. That's really interesting. I also have a question, but specifically, this question is not just for this piece. Is a really big question in my head because I am also interested in improvisation, free stuff in my piece. And recently, I wrote a piano piece. You heard it, and I had the part for the improvisation. And like this, we did 3 versions in a studio, and I chose one of them. And after that, I was thinking, okay, if it was a live performance, I wouldn't have that kind of control. So I just wondering, as a composer, you are interested in this kind of the voice. Are you also thinking of how much control? Because you said I had the 3 versions, I chose one of them. So have you ever thought about that? How much control I want for the piece? Because in the live performance, you don't have that choice.
Yeah, that's true. I think what I would do in the case of a live performance is with Maria, for instance, I would tell her I like the first version best. Can you do it in that style? I would work with the performer and I'd hear the different versions and I'd say I like this or I like that about it. I wouldn't say, can you do a replica of this? I would say I like this or I like that about it. I like the way you move from here to there. And like, what were you thinking when you were doing this or that? And I try and get into the psychology of how it was conceived, and then they can explain to me, and that interaction might give me an idea of maybe how I could refine the music so it's more specifically the way I liked it, or maybe just communicate how I liked it the most and then have it performed. So I think it's more a matter of, like, obviously it would be different with each performer, you'd have to do this again and again, but I think either way I'm interested in that interaction, that conversation anyway. So that's what I would do if I in preparation for a performance, I would sit down with the performer and say like what I like and what I don't.
Yeah, I was thinking of that, but it made, I think that kind of the collaboration with performance has an effect in the score as well, because you might change and like revise and bring some control, and then you basically ruin the first idea of the freedom, and it's kind of contradictions in my mind, but
I think you're right about that. I think it's important maybe not to change too much in the score, but to sort of, that's what I mean, to kind of delve into the psychology of how it was conceived and think, okay, so what was it that psychologically led her to perform it this way? If it's like an expressive feature of the music, how can I enhance that feature visually, so that it doesn't lose its character and its ambiguity and its mystery, but it still kind of triggers the performer to play it the way that I really found the most and powerful and like interesting. So I totally agree with you. I think I wouldn't change any of the notes. I wouldn't change any of the rhythms. Well, there aren't any rhythms, but I wouldn't change any of that. And I've written it in pen anyway. But I might revise maybe, I don't know, some of the articulations or some of the, like I also used, I don't know if you can see, but I use like different intensity lines. So I might do that, a bit more of that, or I don't know, it depends on the feedback from the performer. If they say I saw a kind of motion going upwards, then I might think, okay, so that's what led them to do that. So I might reinforce that feature, reinforce some of but I would try and keep it on an abstract level.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, Simon, it depends on performers. Can't you?
Yeah, it's hard to say.
But in my point of view, I'm also always trying to find a way to make my piece playable for everyone, even those one doesn't like improvisation or freedom. Yeah.
So are you saying, I mean, would you say that the situation would be any different if it was with someone who doesn't like to improvise?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not sure. I'm still in the research and experimenting, but
I mean, with regard to the question that you just asked, would you say it would be any different? Because I imagine even if someone is not very familiar with improvisation, they would have some kind of interpretation, and you'd still have that conversation with them, and you'd still ask them, how do you arrive at this?
Yeah, but those one doesn't know improvisation. For them, it's so hard to make the coherence or transition between the parts, because they might go and just play this part, then this part, and then if even those parts is not really clear, they just leave it and say, okay, what I know, and just play that. You know what I mean?
I mean, sometimes that's a matter of working together with the performer. If you want to achieve something specifically, you could say, how do you move from there to there? You ask them questions and you try and facilitate a conversation that it's almost like teaching in a way. It's like facilitating. When you work with people that aren't familiar with a particular topic, you try and trigger some kind of inspiration in them but you wouldn't necessarily get involved in the creative process that way. You could just ask some questions like, how did you get from here to there? What were you thinking when you play this? And how can you elaborate on that? And like, what notes do you like the most? Can you like just hone in on those? Like, what bits do you want to focus on? If you can't take the whole thing, what bit would you choose to focus on? And why? Like, it's a really, for me, from my point of view, and I think we might be different in that sense, it's all about the psychology. All of my composition is, and all of my ideas are about the psychology behind it. Like, what is it that I find so intriguing, and how can I like communicate that, and how will we find a connection in that sense, like the more subconscious things I find.
But if we don't have a, like, if composer wasn't available or wasn't alive in that time of the performance,
Yeah.
you know, if we don't have composer for explaining things to the performers.
But then I think that's the issue. Like, I think if you're working with people that are like inexperienced in a particular thing, you're either going to expect them to not do a good job of it, or you're going to try and give them some guidance. You can give them the guidance by saying, maybe in the music, you might say, think about this and question yourself. Why are you playing this? What do you think of? You can write all of that in the music. There's nothing wrong with you including text,
Yeah,
I
sure.
think. And those, sometimes those questions and statements are the most powerful tools when it comes to people that aren't necessarily the most intuitive musicians. Actual physical language, I guess, language itself is like the most important tool you can use. So I think you can even integrate that into the music, the musical concept, reinforce it by saying, what are you thinking about? What do you want? Where do you want this to go? And that might help. That, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
May I ask, why do you want it to be performed by people that are not necessarily? Do you want like professional performers that are really good at their instrument but don't necessarily do improvisation?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean? So it's like flexible? Let's see.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, in that case, like, I totally think that they would grasp the concept easily just from the musical material itself. Like, the music will speak for itself to a certain extent, and then just using these small triggers to help them intuitively find their way from one place to another can do like magic, I think.
Yeah, I agree. The all questions I am bringing is really things I am also thinking of, that because
That's great. Does anyone else have any thoughts on this? This is a really interesting
yeah,
question, actually. Simon, you look like you have something to say.
Many, but nothing that's kind of immediately formed itself into an actual comment just now.
Okay. I found that really difficult as well. Working with, like, I don't know, Janelle and things like they're great performers, but it's not necessarily they're like, they don't love to improvise. That's true.
also I recently, after those pieces I did, I also realized that when I am speaking about the improvisation, I have a really strict rules of Iranian improvisation in my mind, subconsciously, and when they do in the other ways, I'm like, no, I didn't want that, and then I was like, okay, I want to control what I am doing now. So, and also the improvisation for different players from around the culture, different culture is totally different. Do you remember the migrant voices? Individual person had different attitude for improvisation.
But I just realized that maybe the issue is that if you can put your finger on it, like the core simplified maybe principles of, like, on a psychological level, maybe, that guide improvisation, you could use that to communicate it with people. Because, like, if you can simplify it, that's the way I always approach when I write music for instruments that aren't like Western, that I'm not really sure I know much about, but I really am inspired by them. Like when I write things that are inspired by Persian music or Santal music, my first thing is to think, what is it about this that I love, and what is it about this that I can connect to on my own level, and how can I simplify it to like almost like an algorithm to that level of simplicity that it can be communicated like really effectively with other people. And I think that's like the best way to communicate that kind of thing. But then I've always been really interested in psychology, and so that's my personal approach generally.
But sometimes that's kind of simplicity can't bring your idea out.
I think it doesn't necessarily have to be linked to the idea itself. It can be a process that allows the idea to move, if that makes any sense. Like, it doesn't have to be the material, it can just be the process. I'm not sure whether it makes sense in my head, but sometimes you need the process to be separate, because the process needs to be something that is technically achievable by other people. So the concept in your head sometimes needs to be separate from the technical side of things. And if you just think of the psychological background behind what's going on, and you separate that, you can use that as like a technical way of allowing something to be conceived. So for instance, if I look at this, I follow the gestures, and that is how I imagine a performer might do it. I don't know how effective that was, but like I like to think that using curves and sliding things and stuff, that's like a universal, like your eye follows those curves and shapes and things. Psychologically, anyone can understand that in a way. So, but it's not the content itself. Do you see what I'm saying? It's just a means of getting through the music.
Yeah, true.
Do you have any other comments, ideas, thoughts?
The discussion is so interesting, and it gets to the level I think maybe everyone is just thinking and digesting and
Yeah.
So yeah, great.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing and making this discussion happen.
My pleasure.
Can I pitch in something more?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, I'm still intrigued by the fact that all the performances started on the left top corner.
Yeah.
I just thought of a totally different thing. In photography, there is a lot of thought about how something visual is divided or how it is distributed over the plane in which it is depicted. And one of the rules of thumb is that typically people start on the lower line and a bit to the left. And then their eye follows a kind of circular move, counterclockwise that is, and then they end in the middle, because that's typically where the focal thing is.
Wow.
So if that had been applied here, then the start should have been in at the bottom with the F clef.
True.
Yeah, and that in fact also makes it more natural. I think it was a suggestion by Simon, I don't remember, to play it. I mean, the bars, the bar fragments, they need not be played from left to right. They could also be played from right to left, and that would be induced by that way of navigating through it.
Yeah.
But this was just because you mentioned psychology a lot, and then I thought of the psychology of interpreting visual things.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I didn't know that at all. That's really fascinating. Yeah, I recently learned from my brother-in-law, he used to work as an art teacher, that like you can have like stability in a composition and not instability. And I think so the stability arises when you kind of split the image into thirds, and everything kind of aligns with those thirds. And I realized that like the because they're all the shapes are slightly off, that it's unstable. So and I think that was really important because I had this really dynamic motion in the in my mind. So yeah, it's really interesting.
That's quite interesting because I personally think I'm a very poor drawer. And indeed, what I miss in my own drawings is stability or balance. Whereas I am a reasonably okay photographer, and there I do manage to find these balances. And indeed, this rule of thirds is quite central there. But I wanted to say that the picture that is now on my screen, it appears as balanced to me. I'm not sure whether you gave that thought.
Well, okay.
Just visually, if I suppose I don't know any notes, anything about reading notes,
sure.
it looks like a balanced picture to me.
Well, okay. So this, if I were to split this into thirds, that would be a straight line.
Yeah.
But I see a line going like this, like that, and then down. So there's a that's not straight at all.
No, but straight is not necessarily straight is not necessary for straightness is not necessary for balance or stability, I would say.
I don't know. I thought it was. I thought you have to have a certain number of lines that are level with the parallel with the like edge in order for it. But I do see what you mean. It's very centered in a way. Like it fits the frame quite well. But I think there are a lot of curves which kind of off-center the kind of divisional layout of it. Because I think if it was like totally stable, you'd have, or reasonably stable even, you'd have at least one line that's kind of parallel. I guess this one's a bit parallel.
Yeah.
But this one's puts it off. It's true, there is some stability in it, but I think a lot of lines, which I think this is like one of the most prominent shapes.
Yeah, I agree.
Centers it, and this one as well, but yeah.
Great.
Slightly, I mean, very loosely connected to that same point. I put my own thoughts on that one, what was just being said in chat, but postcards are not typically square.
I know.
Where's the rest of the postcard?
That bothered me as well. I decided I can't stand the format of a postcard. I'm going to create my own. So I just put the stamp and everything on the back. And I didn't write anything. I felt really bad. I was like, oh my God, I meant to write something and I don't have any space. But I guess it's all written in the music. So yeah, it was in the back. I cut it specifically for the shape that I liked.
Okay, and how big is the postcard?
In
actuality, obviously we're only seeing it on a screen.
I think it's roughly exactly this. I think it is basically the same size as on the screen, actually.
This does look reasonably kind of, practical size, so that's fair.
I think it was. It might have been no, I don't think it was any larger. I don't think it was. Maybe a tiny bit larger. I'm not sure.
I suspect it's probably a bit larger than what we're seeing in like Zoom condensed version of your screen, but what you might be seeing on your screen is maybe more likely.
Yeah, I don't know how to show that, but it's basically like, I guess, like a postcard format, but just a bit more square. So it's about the same size, but a bit more square. like a bit higher.
Yeah.
And not so wide.
That
Yeah.
makes sense.
But I guess I kind of cheated in that sense. Like the challenge was to fit it into a postcard, and that was one of the things that like intrigued me the most.
You could just have left the empty space. In some ways, like that's just as if not more impactful to have like space on either side and then just shape.
True. Yeah, I'm not happy with the fact that I wrote the origami crane like that. It's very symmetrical, and I felt really like I should have at least spaced out the words that it fills up the space in the left-hand corner a bit. But
then I was in my comments. I was talking about how you've kind of centered the sort of more the denser material and the kind of more curving lines, and I think therefore makes sense in some ways that it's this. It stands out and is very sort of right in the middle. I think it would. I think I actually prefer it that way.
Interesting.
But I also think it's good that the title is handwritten right there because and in that kind of text, the way that you have written it, because it emphasizes the kind of, in case it wasn't already adequately emphasized, the kind of hand drawn kind of grafted nature.
Yeah.
How many attempts did it take you to draw this score? Like, do you have multiple versions before you actually put things onto it, or is this all one entirely hand drawn from start to finish?
No, I think I had one previous version.
Because I notoriously, as anyone who's been in the postgrad room at Manchester,
I know.
there would be constantly. Well, it's not being perfectionist. It's knowing that if I get one line slightly wrong, in a way that is actually like meaningfully like it's gonna stand out and feel wrong,
right?
That's 2 hours of work down the drain. So I will like take this thing and it's almost completed state and still photocopy it so that I can work on it. And if I balls it up in that last moment, I can. I have a save state.
I didn't have an access to a photocopier, so I couldn't do that. I literally just drew it once on some shitty piece of paper and then copied it out. I think I traced it actually. I did it once, traced it, and then when I traced it, I think I adapted it a little bit. But I really am not as near as much of a perfectionist as you are. Like, I was just like, okay, well, it's all very, expressive anyway. Like, if something goes wrong, it's just character of the image. That's how I feel of it. So.
It's just what we're trying to achieve at different points. I've got pieces which are much less perfectionist, and then I've got pieces where it's, if something is very clearly a grid, then it needs to be a grid. If it's something that's thoroughly off, then it's kind of this weird thing where I'm trying to kind of hand draw it and embrace the kind of humanity of the making something by hand in that process, while also trying to produce something which, I don't know, so some element of the kind of traditional world of composition still calling to me as trying to produce something that kind of is publishable.
I remember you were working with fractals at some point, weren't you? Is that what?
Yeah, that was my orchestral piece.
And
I did some very similar things to you on that front to try and make the whole thing, like every segment of that would work together with any other segment because I needed to.
But yours was much more like mathematically worked out, like from that point of view as well.
Because it was because of the nature of it. So yours was taking this starting point of a scribble, whereas I was taking the starting point of a fractal. So I was trying to, and the whole point of a lot of what I was doing in the PhD was taking that as the sort of this image, as this idea of what the score is doing as a starting point to then put the rest on it, which is what you've done here in many ways. It's very much the same, stemming from the same basic kind of idea of practice. But
we did it from different
what that image is will inform the rest of that process. Right. So if I'm starting from this idea of a fractal, then obviously everything else built around that was fractal. So I was using infinite sort of series. I was using the harmonic series and the Per Nergard's infinity series, and I did say the harmonic series, didn't I? Yeah, and kind of mixing them together into something so that because of the fact that it's a harmonic series of one note that's at the bottom of the orchestra,
Yeah.
everything else is going to more or less make sense because it's centered around that point.
Wow.
And it's the same. You say wow, but it's essentially no different from what you're doing here. It's just that it's it was centered around one thing rather than one set of notes rather than another set of notes.
But you still had like some kind of. It is slightly different because you had. Well, no, I guess it isn't. I mean, you had like a musical concept kind of linking it, didn't you? Well, I guess I did as well. I suppose I had like a limitation of notes, and that's how it all kind of.
I had a concept that dictated more of the order of the notes within each individual part, but how that then translates across the actual whole orchestra and each individual part, they're all following the same trajectory, but they're not playing the same notes, but they're playing notes that relate to each other. So it's kind of it's I was writing a piece for orchestra, so that's why things were much more. Things had to be a little bit more planned for me to feel like It's for me. It was always towing that line. So, and this is kind of Sorry, I'm getting it's getting to not quite finding the words. As will be familiar to anybody who witnessed me in my vibe. This is me when I'm trying to think as I'm talking. It's kind of this. Yeah, I don't know, that line of control and kind of where what I am controlling and what I'm not controlling was where my whole practice here stemmed from in some ways. So it's so that's something that interests me a lot. So yeah, I was maintaining a fair amount of control over that one, but that's because I was needing to work with a very traditionalist institution that is an orchestra. You know, it's if I was then handing this to if I was writing a piece for like you and Atafe, it would be I would go much more kind of open-ended probably. I'd go think, okay, well this is an opportunity to work with people who are not grounded within this world of orchestral music and how music is valued and what piece with rigid ideas of what a piece of music is and should look like and should feel like. Whereas with an orchestra, I need to come up with something which is going to make them feel comfortable with it.
Yeah.
You know, because they're the look of nerves on the orchestra's face at the start of the first rehearsal when it was brought out was quite interesting. Whereas then actually once we got to the end of the first rehearsal, it was actually everyone was very comfortable once they kind of got a sense of how this worked, but also that the material was designed in a way where it would work and they weren't taking as much of a risk as you might be performing something like your piece here. There's a given that there's this kind of thing that holds it all together, so no matter what they do, as long as they follow the instructions, it will be good. Or you'd be really hard pushed for it not to be. I'd have been happy with it anyway. So it's it's important, I think, with an orchestra for them to feel like you know what you're doing. And that there is that intention there. That piece was that piece was not performed in concert. No, sorry, not conducted in concert. It was performed in concert, which is very nice. But it was conducted in rehearsal, but the conductor was there not really to wave their arms, but more to kind of be a go-between between me and the performers, to kind of basically to sell them on the piece and to kind of get and to draw out the kind of musicality.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of what I was talking about before when I was saying like asking people questions to help them navigate.
Yeah, this is where conductors are actually really helpful. I realized over the process of this, because he kind of was introduced the idea of the piece through kind of. So sorry, this is weird because this is just getting into us talking about music that we know, but I haven't presented to the rest of you here. So sorry to the other three of you who maybe haven't seen this piece. Actually, I can't remember, Geraint, if you were in Manchester at that time or not. You're probably around. I don't know if you're at that concert.
I don't think I was at the concert.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's fine. But it was kind of, so the piece involved all the players had a piece of percussion which they had to sound before they could play a part, and if their percussion sound coincided with somebody else in the orchestra playing theirs, they had to try again basically before they could play the material. and they were supposed to want to get through all their material. And but then that was a difficulty, because so we started doing this with kind of similar games where it's like you've got a group and you try and count to 20, but nobody's allowed to sort of say the number at the same time. So it's kind of this mind game of who's gonna say it, and if two people say it at the same time, then you always start. So it's this group, these kind of, you get almost like team building exercises. So that's basically what
hear that live.
So, but then making the conductor was then really helpful in making them remember, for example, that it's not a race. It's as much as you're trying to get through your material first, you don't want to then play it like that. It needs to sound like it's this slowly developing sound world. And it's these little things which, as a composer, and you can kind of communicate, but a conductor who's used to working with an orchestra a lot can do that more effectively, and is the conductor is trained to communicate with an orchestra, and as a composer you're not really.
Yeah, I can see that.
So that's why they're very helpful to talk to, and and sort of like music directors of contemporary music ensembles and so on, for like talking to about these kind of things, because they're the people who are oftentimes doing that work. Kind of considering how it's going to be interpreted, and the kind of creative side of it to some extent. If it's an ensemble piece, obviously, then if it's an individual, then you talk to them about that. But if you're trying to gauge across a range of work, you kind of need those go-betweens, I think, to some extent, to if you're wanting to gain any kind of quantifiable results from asking questions about the performance.
Yeah. Did you hear different renditions of it?
Yes, I mean, across the last sort of couple of rehearsals, I've got a recording. I think the recording that's on YouTube is of the dress rehearsal, actually, rather than no, it is of the performance. But I got a recording of the dress rehearsal as well, and it's interesting. But this is one orchestra interpreting it one way, with having had a fair amount of creative feedback.
That's one thing I believe in. Like, even if your piece is meant to be improvised to a certain extent, I think there's always value in having it practiced. Like with this piece, I think Maria must have practiced it quite a bit, because she was obviously very familiar with the material. Yeah, she's an absolute perfectionist as well. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm just guessing, but she's like very, very skilled in that sense. And I think that there is, even though it's intuitive, sometimes like you can be more intuitive when you know the material, when you're familiar with it. So I think that almost gives you like more control over what you're doing as a performer, using your own intuition. So I personally like it when people play it through a couple of times and familiarize themselves and try different ways of exploring the material. That's what I think anyway.
Yeah. The kind of topic of conversation has just kind of brought me to. How do you feel about just generally the risk involved with this kind of thing if you're opening things up to sort of performer freedom? Because there is, all it would have taken with probably I accepted this going in, but if one person just decides to not sound their percussion at all, then you've got a piece which more or less sounds exactly like the recording that I just put into the chat, except that you're then at the end, you've just got one person over and over again playing their whole part from start to finish with percussion, punctuated by percussion bits. And I decided I had to make a conscious decision that is something I'm fine with. With your piece, somebody could make a 10-hour performance of this piece for solo kazoo, and it's obviously this gets into those kind of questions around ownership of this kind of work. I feel that in both our cases here, there's enough has been specified to say that actually I think yes, this is we have where there's enough of this is definitely composed by us to say, okay, this is a thing that I made, and therefore whatever this performer does, to what extent would somebody have to bastardize this before it became something that was not mine, before I would cease to take ownership of it? And it's this kind of concept of testing to destruction, where it's kind of like, I'm going, like, sure, I've got this section, I'm just going to loop this one section over and over again and over and over again, and then play everything else really short. It's, you know, it's.
I think
how do you feel about that whole thing, basically?
I think the main thing there is making your intention clear, because I think the whole thing is about the intention. Like in this piece, for instance, my intention is for the music to travel through the structure and like somehow find connections between different parts. And if that's clear to the performer, then you can't really go wrong. Like, I mean, if it's done well, you'll try and get that concept, like perfect that concept. And I think really it's a matter of intention. So if you go away from that, then it's just going to sound rubbish, in my opinion.
So in some ways, this goes back to the my original question, actually, of kind of you because now you're mentioning instructions, and so because when you said that you didn't have instructions, my immediate thought was, okay, are we talking that kind of expression of intention, or are we talking actual like performance directions of this is what you need to do, which to my mind is often what instructions in a piece of music are. But it's interesting that then now maybe we're getting into where we're edging into a world here where actually the instruction is more of an artistic sort of statement of what to try and achieve, rather than anything actually precise.
I think a lot of material, like musical material, it comes about through this intention anyway. Like if you wanted to intuitively achieve something, I think it's usually more effective to focus on the intention than the actual technical means of doing it, because not everyone will understand that, or they might not identify with it. So if you make your intention absolutely clear, the performer will know better how to do that than you a lot of the time. So if I tell the performer, I want you to form a connection between these bits and make them sound like they're integrated, I feel like that's going to be more effective than say, this is how you move between them.
Yeah. Cool. Really interesting. I'm going to need to head off because it's 7:30 and I need to.
Yeah.
It's been really cool.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming and making the effort to be here. It's really interesting also to hear about your insight and like your experience, because I know we're kind of interested in similar things. So thanks so much for coming. I think we're probably ready to finish now, aren't we? Yeah. So I just wanted to thank everyone for being here. Like it really means a lot. It's so good to have so many different views and so many different like comments and things. So we run this like the first Sunday of every month. Next month we're not having one, but in September, I believe is the next one. And it's going to be the same time. Should be the same link, but the passcode might be different, so maybe it might be worth. I'm not sure. Like re-registering with Eventbrite might work better. And one more thing. Oh yeah, if you have a composition, please do get in touch. We're always really curious to find out what's going on, like what people are up to, and we love to explore different people's works and to help them promote themselves and just form new connections. So please let us know if you want to have something performed. Thank you so much. Have a lovely evening. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.